Russ has, I think, one of the most interesting stories that I've heard. You can read that he grew up in Paris, France. But what I can tell you about Russ is that he grew up in a home that did not believe in God at all. And rather than me try to tell you the story, I will tell you that I think Russ Breault is one of the most talented, amazing Christian men that I know. And I'm going to turn it over to Russ. Russ has his own microphone, by the way. Come on up here, Russ.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you. Thank you, Jim. I want to just say that Jim and Mary Pace and the whole Pace family have been a blessing to me for, I guess, probably over 25 years now. And so it's a privilege to be able to come and do this. I do a lot of speaking, but I never do this, what you're about to see or hear, which is what we do here in the construction meeting, is our stories. You know, so many stories as we have heard over the past couple of years that we've been doing these construction meetings tend to focus, either for good or for bad, on their father. And my story involves my dad as well. You know, my dad was career Navy, and hence I was born in Paris, France. So in keeping with that, bonjour. But I only lived there a year and moved, and then came back to Alexandria, Virginia, where my dad was stationed at the Pentagon. And then he moved on to Boston Navy Shipyard, so we moved to Massachusetts. And then he went to the Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island, which is where he retired, which is kind of where I grew up. And by the way, not a bad place to grow up, Newport, Rhode Island. And both my mom and dad were Catholic, as they were both from Massachusetts. And but by the time I came along, my father had completely fallen away from the faith and had become a professing atheist. In fact, the sermon that I heard growing up was, "Son, there is no God. You know, religion is fine for those who need it, but I see it as nothing more than just a crutch for the weak." And so I said, "Okay, Dad, you know, whatever you say, you must be right." So then I went to high school, of course, and then probably sophomore, junior year, I took the required course in biology, and there was a section in there on evolution. And in fact, I did a big term paper on Charles Darwin and his theories of random chance and natural selection, survival of the fittest and all that, and became more convinced than ever that my dad must be right. Because, you know, there's only 3 religious questions, right? How do we get here, which is a question of origins? Why are we here, which is a question of purpose? And where are we going, which is a question of destiny? And so that seemed to answer that question in terms of how did we get here. And so my atheism just became solidified through the study of evolution. And now, when I was in high school, I had a friend of mine who was a year ahead of me, and he went to Catholic high school. I went to public high school, and we met in Boy Scouts. And his name is Mike Crandall, and I mention him by name because he looms very large in my story. And so I would go over to his house on the weekends occasionally, and he'd be getting home from church, and I'd say to him, "How can you believe in this stuff? I mean, come on. I mean, where's God? You can't see him. I mean, how could you believe in something you can't see?" And so I'd challenge him all the time on his Catholicism, and he did as good a job as he could, you know, as maybe a high schooler could do to defend his faith. And so he goes off to college at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, and he gets involved in this evangelical organization called Campus Crusade for Christ, and many of you have probably heard of this. Well, he gets hugely born again, conversion, transformed, whatever the word is that you want to use. So now he comes back home on weekends about once a month, calls me up on the phone and says, "Russ, let's get together." So I go over to his house, and we either go down to the beach or walk out on Cliff Walk somewhere, drive around Ocean Drive. Like I said, Newport's a really nice place to grow up. And we'd be talking about this and that, but the only thing Mike ever wanted to talk about was Jesus. It was Jesus, 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 Jesus. And so I said to him, Mike, what has gotten into you? And he said, Jesus. I should have seen that one coming. So I was quite taken by his transformation. I mean, is this the same Catholic kid that I knew a year earlier that could barely, talk about his faith? And so I became intrigued by his transformation. So he'd go back to school, and I began to nibble around the edges of Christianity, going, participating in various Catholic youth groups and Bible studies and things like this. And then he'd come back home on the weekends, and he'd always hand me these little tracts, these little booklets and stuff. Read this, read that, read this. And so finally there was one tract that he wanted to read together. Now this was this gold yellow looking tract called "Have You Heard of the Four Spiritual Laws?" And so we wanted to read this one together. And we sat down in his room, we read this whole thing, and there's a prayer in here to receive Jesus Christ as your Savior. And he says, do you want to say that prayer? And I said, why not? And so I said the prayer, and now I'm waiting. I said, what's up? I said the prayer, and nothing happened. And so I figured either the match didn't light or the fuse was wet or something, but so I'm waiting and nothing happened. So he goes back off to school, and I continue to dabble around the edges of Christianity, but I became disinterested in it. And so by the end of my senior year in high school, I said, nah, I'm not interested in this anymore. And so I wouldn't see Mike for another 10 years. And now he went on to become a missionary with Wycliffe Bible translators. And so now I go off to this small private school in upstate New York. Now I had chosen this school because it had a very progressive liberal arts program called World Studies. Now this is in Seneca Falls, New York. The school's closed now, so it shut its doors a long time ago. But at the time, it was very innovative. Anyways, so I go to this school. Now they have a 4-1-4 program. And a 4-1-4 means you have 4 months in the first semester, 4 months in the second semester, and 1 month in the month of January where you did a self-directed independent study. Now you had to have a faculty advisor, had to be approved. Now when I first get to this school, I meet a woman. Now she's a little bit older than the rest of the students. She's at the very mature age of about 23, and she is a trance medium, a trance channeler. So she's been involved in the occult all her life, and so she begins talking to me about all this stuff, and I became kind of interested because I had already kind of dismissed Christianity, and so I was very intrigued by what she was involved in. And so I said, and her name is Deborah, and I said, Deborah, you're going to be my independent study. And so I ended up writing a term paper on parapsychology and the occult. Well, in this process, we did all kinds of experiments in the realm of the occult. Everything you could do. Seances, table tipping, tarot cards, automatic writing, Ouija boards, everything you can imagine in the realm of the occult. Now we're talking January 1973, so this is right during the tail end of the Vietnam War era. Now we go down to a little thrift store in downtown Seneca Falls. Seneca Falls is maybe 10,000 population. And there's this little thrift store there, and they had a rack of winter coats. And so I found one, and it's this kind of blue-gray, thick wool coat that goes from all the way down, almost to the floor. Maybe an inch off of the floor, at least on me, anyways. And so I bought this thing for $0.25, and just wore it around a few times, just something stupid to do, right? And then eventually put it back in my closet in my dorm room, and just forgot about it. Now we're about halfway into the month of January, and Deborah and I are doing more of our experiments, And it's about 2 in the morning, and we're sitting cross-legged facing each other on my bed. And there's Bruce, which is my roommate over here. He couldn't care less about any of this stuff. He thought we were nuts. And so we have this Ouija board sitting in between us. Now, if any of you, I don't recommend owning a Ouija board. If you have one, go home and throw it away immediately, okay? But a Ouija board is this occult device. It was actually invented right there in upstate New York around the mid-1800s. And it has yes and no, then it has the numbers 1 through 10, and then it has your alphabet. And it has this little shuttle that kind of moves along this board so you can actually see what letter or number it is actually hovering over. So we're here and we have our hands on this little shuttle. Now, using the Ouija board is like deep sea fishing. You cast your line out and you just kind of reel it in. All of a sudden, we got something. Oh boy, holy smokes, we got something now. And so this thing begins to move all over this board. And so we said, well, can we help you? You're right. Like we can really help this thing. Anyways, so he says, yes. He says, and then I said, well, what can we do? And it spells out C-O-A-T. Coat? I said, what coat? It spells out B-L-U-E. Blue coat? What blue coat? I didn't even remember the thing I bought at the thrift store. I was saying, are you talking about my blue blazer that I said, no. And then it dawned on me, oh, are you talking about that coat I bought at the thrift store? Boom, yes. And he says, well, what about that coat? And it says B-U-R-Y, bury. You want us to bury the coat? It's upstate New York in January. We can't bury this coat. And it says B-U-R-N, burn. You want us to burn the coat? No, we can't burn this coat. Security will come and have us arrested. And then it spells out B-R-I-D-G-E, bridge. And I said, well, this is interesting, bridge. So now in Seneca Falls, there is a canal that runs through it. And so we said, oh, so you want us to throw the coat over the bridge? Boom, yes. It says, okay. So now we had a solution, right? So we said this, well, can this wait till morning? Now, at this point, when it appeared that we had a solution, it also appeared that maybe we were hedging. At this point, Deborah and I both stood up. This spirit, this demon, whatever it was that we were in contact with, shot through my feet all the way to out the top of my head. I stood up in abject terror. I mean, beyond fear. I'm talking absolute terror. I went to the closet, grabbed the coat, ran outside the dormitory, threw it in the snow, ran back in, said to Bruce, you're driving. And so we collected the coat, put it in a black plastic bag, threw it in the trunk of my 1967 Rambler American, and then we drove down to the canal, right? And so it's parked on the side of the road. Deborah and I take this coat, walk up to the top of the bridge, and throw it off. Now, Deborah claims that she sees the image of this man dressed in some kind of military uniform waving at her. Maybe, I don't know, I didn't see that. Now, my other friend who was working with us, he was down by the car. He claims to hear the shutters on the warehouse clacking back and forth. I don't know, I didn't hear that. But all I know is that something shot from the sole of my foot out to the top of my head. Now, we pieced it together and thought at the time, don't know if this is true or not, is that maybe this guy was someone who died in the military and never had a funeral, and this was some way of getting closure on his life. Maybe, don't know. But at this point, I also became aware that, you know what? I don't think I'm going to do this anymore. And so I quickly brought this project to a close and finished my term paper. At the end of January, I said, Deborah, it's been nice knowing you. And I took that Ouija board, broke it in half, threw it in the trash. Now what had happened here, though, was that coming out of atheism, I became aware of one thing, that there certainly is a spiritual realm beyond this realm. Pure evolutionary theology or philosophy would say that this is all there is and there ain't no more. But there's obviously more than this. And however, not knowing what's out there was pretty unsettling. So it's kind of comforting to know that there's more than this life, but at the same time unsettling is that you don't really know what's there. And so I continued to dabble around the edges of other forms of spirituality, and I mean because I had already dismissed Christianity. And so I got involved in transcendental meditation and some other kind of quasi-Buddhist type things, but then just became disinterested in like all of it. And so now I graduated from college, and my brother, who's about 7 years older than me, he's an attorney, or he becomes an attorney and sets up law practice in Columbus, Georgia. Now I'm thinking, well, maybe I'll become a lawyer. So I decided to move down to Columbus and live with him and work with him as a kind of a paralegal. And I did that for about 6 months, which cured me of the desire to become a lawyer. And no offense to any lawyers out there, but you have to have the right disposition to do that. And apparently I didn't have it. And it's but as fate would happen, though, is that I met my wife to be, who was working at another law firm. And so 4.5 months later, we get married. And so now we then move up to Illinois, where my parents had then moved from Newport to Illinois, if you can imagine. Joliet. It's like moving from heaven to hell. And it's but at any rate, they lived in Joliet, and so I had a job in Chicago. My wife had a job at a local bank, and we stayed in their basement apartment. Now I'm going to come back and just say this. Now, when we were going to get married, I refused to be married in a church because I thought that was hypocritical. But I did allow for her Baptist minister to perform the ceremony. Now he required 3 counseling sessions, one with her, one with both of us, and one with me. And so with the counseling session with me, of course, as you can imagine, this is a big step. It requires total commitment. Are you really in love? All the things you would say in a counseling session, right? And now we're coming to the end, and now he's going for the close. And he says, well, let me just ask you this. Have you ever accepted Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior? And I said no, because I didn't think that first time counted, And so I said no. And he says, well, would you like to? And I said no. And he said, he was kind of shaken by that, and he says, well, why not? And I says, well, because now I had just taken 2 semesters of comparative world religion and philosophy and all this occult stuff, and I would say, I'm not convinced Jesus is the only way. There might be 100 ways, I don't know, but I'm just not ready for that. And he says, okay, well, can I pray for you? And he says, go for it. And now I made the mistake. Not really a mistake. I made the mistake of borrowing his prayer book, right? Because I want to construct my own marriage ceremony. And so now I start reading this thing, and I'm reading all these psalms and scripture verses and prayers. And this is when the Holy Spirit begins to move in my spirit, reading his prayer manual. So we get married. This is in August of 1976. And now we're going to go on a 2-week honeymoon. We don't have any money. We have to sell her 1968 Ford Galaxy for $500. So we have enough money to go on this honeymoon. All we're going to do is drive up the East Coast and back again for over like 2 weeks. So the first place we go to is Charleston, South Carolina. We stay with her brother, Doug, for like a night. And then we're on up the East Coast, and we stay in Alexandria, Virginia, where I lived as a child. And now we stay in a Night's Inn. Now this is a cheap version of Days Inn, okay? Now there, hold on, I have to get a prop. Now there, on the nightstand, not in it, but on it, was this Bible. Now this is a reach out version of the New Testament in the Living Translation, right? Now I picked this thing up, and I open it up in Matthew. Well, that was different. Every other time I open up the Bible, I open up in Genesis. Got to about Abraham and quit. And so, and so now I'm opening up in like Matthew, and I'm saying, wow. And the pages go, the actual words go from left to right. There's like no split columns, and it actually reads like a normal English. I was intrigued. And so now there was a little envelope to give a $2 donation to the Virginia Bible Society, the oldest Bible society in America, founded by Thomas Jefferson. I did not leave a donation, so I stole my first Bible. Now, now here we are on my honeymoon, driving. Now, we're driving along, and I'm reading Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and I'm saying to Don, now Donna grew up Baptist, and I'd say this, and I'd say this, did you know he did this? Did you know he said this? I was intrigued by what I was learning about Jesus. I had never learned anything about Jesus. Growing up, I thought Dan was God's last name, right? So now we finally get back, and then we moved to Illinois, like I said. Now we're staying in this basement apartment of my parents' house. Donna be asleep over here, you know, and I'm still on college time, so I'm like up at 2 a.m, and I'm reading this New Testament. Now, in high school, when I was dabbling around the edges of all these Catholic youth groups and Bible studies, one of them had given me a crucifix, and so I went and found this crucifix and hung it on the mantle of my. There was a fireplace down there, so we actually hung it on I hung it on the mantle. So now I'm reading the New Testament, looking at this crucifix, reading the New Testament, looking at the crucifix, reading the New Testament, and then it dawned on me, or a realization came, that Jesus was real, that he is who he said he is, but he is not in me. But I knew he could be, because of the testimony of my friend Mike Crandall. I saw the transformation that occurred in him. I jumped up. This is around February of 1977. I jump up, I run to a dresser drawer, I open it up, and there's this brown paper bag, like contraband. But in it is all of the Bible tracts and all the little booklets that he had given me 5 years earlier. I lay everything out onto the couch. I'm looking for a particular booklet. You know which one it is. This one right here, 4 Spiritual Laws, is I knew there was a prayer in here to ask Jesus into my life. Now, the first time, the match didn't light, the fuse was wet. I was determined this time something was going to happen. And so I said this prayer over and over and over again. Jesus, come into my life. Fill me with your Holy Spirit. Forgive me of my sins and all that stuff, right? And so I said this over the first night, the second night, the third night, and on the morning of the 4th day, as God is my witness, I woke up that morning and I felt like I was floating in a vat of warm oil. It was unbelievable. And I had exactly what the Apostle Paul says. I was experiencing joy unspeakable, full of glory. I had that peace that passes all understanding. And I also learned that Hebrews 11:6 is true, that God is the rewarder of those who diligently seek him. I was determined that I felt like I was Jacob wrestling with God. I was determined that I was going to have this experience that my friend Mike had. And this was the beginning. Now when that happened, the entire floodgates opened. And so now I felt like I was running Class 5 rapids in a rowboat. I mean, so everything opened up spiritually for me, but here's the problem. Other than my wife, and she had grown up in the faith, but I didn't know any other Christians. And so I had this swirl of Christianity and all this occult stuff and all this New Age stuff all swirling together. And so now I got to tell you, another book that I was reading along with this New Testament was a book. Now this is going to sound really stupid. And it is. But it's a book that I bought, no doubt, in the occult section of Walden Bookstore. And it was called Arthur Ford Speaks from Beyond. Now, Arthur Ford was a psychic. He was a contemporary of Edgar Cayce, and he died. And so this was allegedly the author writing the words of Arthur Ford through the occult technique of automatic writing. You know, so Arthur Ford is speaking from the other side and telling us all about the 7 levels of the afterlife, and that 7th level is where you achieve Christ consciousness and all this stuff. And it dawned on me. I'm saying, are you kidding me? I just had an incredible encounter with Jesus Christ, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and this book doesn't even mention him by name and only references him one time as the Christ consciousness? I said, wait a minute, something's not right. And then I began to realize right then and there that this is like oil and water. And so I knew then that I had to separate out what was Christian and what was falsehood. And so now I threw that book in the trash. Every other book I had from college in the realm of the occult, all that went in the trash. And then I knew that I could only focus on that which was Christian. Now, in May of 1977, we had just come through the worst winter on record. And my wife said to me, Russ, I'm moving south with you or without you. And so I said, well, I guess we're moving south. And so we moved to Charleston, South Carolina, which is where her brother was in the Navy. And so we stayed there for a couple years. Now, what's great about the South, contrasted with the North, when I'm from the North, is that in the South you have Christian radio stations. In the South you have Christian bookstores. And so I found the Christian radio station, and it never moved from my dial. I must have gone to the Christian bookstore twice a week to buy, because I was a sponge. I knew nothing and wanted to know everything. Around October of 1977, we had an old console TV set that had no reception. And so cable TV was coming along. And so my wife signed us up for cable TV. And so finally we got reception. And I also got 5 new channels off satellite, just 5. HBO, WTCG, which became TBS, Madison Square Garden Sports, which became USA Network, and Christian Broadcasting Network, and PTL. 2 24-hour Christian networks. 2 out of my 5 channels from satellite were Christian. I was ecstatic. My electronic seminary had arrived. And so a few months later, I ended up going to work for cable TV. And it was the best job I ever had, because now I'm selling a product that everyone wanted and nobody had. You know, so that was a great job. But I only had to work maybe 3 or 4 hours a day and make lots of money and have all the time in the world to do what? To read this book, to read all the other books I was buying at the Christian bookstore, listen to Christian radio, watch Christian television. I was absolutely immersed for about 2 years. And then finally we left Charleston and went back to Columbus, Georgia. Donna would go back to school and pick up her undergraduate. I go to grad school and pick up my MBA. Now, when I'm there, I'm at this school, and this is right around the time that I heard that there was a team of scientists going to Turin, Italy, to study an artifact, and which purported to be the actual burial shroud of Jesus, the Shroud of Turin. And so I began reading articles about this, and I would clip them out and hold on to them. I read a book called Sacred Shroud by Thomas Humber. And so I asked if I could write a couple articles for the college newspaper about the shroud, and they said go for it. And so in June of 1980, National Geographic came out with a full-page spread on the shroud. And so after I write my articles, and I did a lot of research, a lot of reading, called some of the scientists on the phone to get some quotes, and I became convinced that, man, this is an incredible mystery, a phenomenal testimony to Christ, and yet nobody knows about it. And so now I went to the first United States symposium on the Shroud in 1981, and this is where all of the scientists gave their, in like a 2-day event, presented all their respective papers, and that's where I got to know everybody that was involved in history and archaeology and the sciences, and I've been involved in the Shroud ever since. So my testimony, is I just want to say this, that I witnessed to my dad for 20 years. And he passed away in February of 1998. But in October of 1997, I flew up to Rhode Island, and I knew that this would be one of the last opportunities I'd have to speak to him. And I brought with me four spiritual laws. And he was ready. And we sat down in his living room, and it took 3 hours to go over a little booklet that you can read in 5 minutes. But by the end of it, I asked him, I said, Dad, is there any reason why you cannot accept Jesus Christ now as your Lord and Savior? And he said, no. And I said, would you like to pray with me? And he said, yes. And he said the prayer, and he was later reconfirmed to his Catholic faith, received Holy Communion through the Catholic Church. And so I was elated and just absolutely thrilled that I was able to lead my father to the Lord using the very same track that led me to the Lord 20 years earlier. And so my testimony is a tribute to friends who are brave enough and bold enough to witness their faith. My friend Mike Crandall. It's a tribute to hotel Bibles, especially readable New Testaments. And it's a tribute to Bible tracts. And those of you who dismiss these things, hand them out. You never know what seed you're planting. For me, it took 5 years to germinate. It might take someone else 20 years. You just never know how long that seed is going to take to germinate, but eventually it will. I brought with me a stack of these 4 spiritual laws booklets. If you would like one, if there's someone you want to share this with, you come up here and pick up one of these little tracts for yourself. And so, thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity. God bless.